May God's blessing rest upon the experiences of Scripture on this day. May it guide the meditations of our hearts and the words of my lips. So this worship series has been built around the idea of relationships, building relationships. And we started with the creation, and we've moved on through there, and now we have this moment where we understand or come to hear a story of unknowing and the fear that can come from not knowing. It's also got a little morality tale. If you see something really spectacular catching your eye, go the other way, because it's God reaching out to get you. Or maybe you walk boldly up to that thing and say, "Here I am." But I want to focus on relationship. The readings begin, this narrative, this section of the story begins with a simple line. There arose a new Pharaoh in the land. The Pharaoh didn't know Jacob. This Pharaoh was unaware of the past, of the history, of the story, of the narrative. This Pharaoh didn't sit around and share the stories or listen to the stories that were shared by generations before. This Pharaoh was distant from the Jewish population that had been growing in the land, the population that had been invited to settle when it was a family, the population that had been active and working for the benefit and the blessing of the land of Egypt. Pharaoh was unaware and separated from. It's hard to have a relationship when there's distance. When we don't have firsthand experience of the other, it's hard to imagine what it is to relate to them. It's hard to even picture them sometimes as a human being. The distance between Pharaoh and the people of Israel on the outside created the opportunity for a distance to grow on the inside. Now, this has been actually a pattern that has been used by certain leaders, nation states throughout history. We isolate a population and then we remove their story that they tell about themselves, and then we redefine them and we create a new narrative. One of the most prominent examples would be what happened under the Third Reich. As we isolate populations, especially the Jewish population, we remove the story they tell about themselves and we redefine them as something less than human. And then we bring other people in and say, look, they're living less than human lives. No thought given to the fact that it was the leadership that took the Jews and put them in the ghettos and took away their ability to function best as human beings. We recreate the narrative. Pharaoh, in the distance, in this unknowing, recreates a story. It's a story that is built on fear. He does not know Jacob, nor does he seem to know any of the other Israelites that are residing in his land. And instead of attempting to bridge that gap, he redefines them. They are no longer the guests. They are no longer people of faith that live in the land who have been there, part of the blessing of Egypt. They are now a potential enemy. And the narrative that's created blows the numerical population out of proportion and distorts that community. Relationships are hard when we don't know. It's really easy to imagine what someone is like when we don't know them. we can just sort of take a look, or we can read a little blurb, or we can catch a little word from somebody else saying, this is what this person is. And if we don't know them, it is easy then to build, to dehumanize perhaps, to work from a place of fear. And that's where Pharaoh is at, working from a place of fear. Moses is one of the ones that Pharaoh has been afraid of, whether Pharaoh knew it or not, because Moses himself was disconnected from his identity. He did not have a good relationship with himself, so to speak. He has always been a stranger. He was one of the boys who had been condemned, and then he was one who was given up by his parents, and then he was one who was adopted into another community and raised as a prince of Egypt. And then he was one who was exiled and left wandering in the wilderness. And then he was one who was married into a family, a good family, a family of some faith that had a great place to be, but he was still a stranger. He was not of Midian. Moses' identity was awash. He wasn't really well grounded with a sense of who he was. And then he ends up on that holy ground, so to speak. Take off your shoes that your roots can dig in. It's a lot of fun to wiggle your toes into the soft earth and into the sand. There's other things that wiggle in toes that's not fun, but soft earth and sand, that's fun. We like that. Take off your shoes and get them in. And shoes meant something in the ancient world, just as they do today. I remember growing up, and you can cause a fight if you scuff someone's kicks. You don't mess with people's shoes. That's why my shoes come pre-scuffed. When God reaches out to this individual who has to be questioning, just who am I in the grand scheme of things? I mean, I've got my stuff that I do, I've got my family that I'm part of, but I don't have this broader sense, this relationship with myself or something bigger than me. When God says, take off your sandals, God isn't just saying this ground is particularly special. God is saying you need to take off the things that symbolize protection and status and the fact that you're on a journey. Take those things off because you have reached the place that you need to be in this moment. And your status in society is of no concern to me as your God, and you don't need protection. Take those things off. And Moses suddenly begins to redefine or reconnect with himself to understand better who he is. Now, he doesn't like it. He doesn't react well to it. He's going to go on and say, surely, God, there is somebody better than me. There's someone more qualified who has the physical attributes and gifts that are needed to do this. Yes, God, you are mistaken, for I am not who you think I am. Just so you know, Jedi mind tricks don't work on God. And that's the last relationship that is worked on as well. That relationship with God. Moses is becoming aware of himself and who he is in connection to God. Now, it is hard to know ourselves. There's a lot of fear involved in it. There's also fear in coming to know God because God does ask things. God does call. And it is a lot easier at times to just avoid. Like I said, if you see that thing drawing you in, maybe you want to go the other way. Unless God's playing reverse psychology on you. Yes. Moses isn't just coming to know himself better, but he is coming to know God in that relationship that is being built. And God defines it in Scripture. I am the God of these folks. It is a connection to the ancestors, to the past. Well, Moses has been disconnected from those ancestors in the past. That's not part of his identity. But as his identity is becoming established and we awakened, God can come in and say, this is who you are, Moses, and this is how I connect to you. I am the God of this. And you are going to go to these people, my people, who are in Egypt, who have been isolated in a way that allows Pharaoh and others to dehumanize, to reduce the value. You're going to go into Egypt and you're going to declare the nature of the relationship of the people Israel to themselves, to their God, and to each other. And you're going to bring them out. And the Exodus story is all about building the people Israel as a people. But Moses first has to come to understand himself so that he can go in and help people understand God. Now, God doesn't call Moses because Moses is perfect. God doesn't call Moses because Moses is imperfect. God called Moses because God is God. Same thing for us. We might not want to go to that place to engage with those folks because they are other than us. They are at a distance and we fear and we don't understand. We might not want to go and do what it is God's called us to do because we are isolated from ourselves. There is a distance within us and we do not understand and we are afraid and we don't want to be part of it. We might not want to do it because we know exactly who the people are that we're working with and we don't want any part of that. But God is God. The ground of our being. That which we sink our roots into. God is the instigator of creation and the relationships that are in creation as well. Even the challenging relationships, God is the one who brought them into being, the ones that shape us and the ones that we shape. God is there and active in it. We are in relationship with God and with others and with ourselves. We are called. We are called to strive to be as whole as we can be, to be as healing and healed as possible, because we have been dared to know God, to know ourselves, to know others, and to be known in return. To undo the distance of fear and unknowing with the proximity of a living and loving God. We are called to be church today. Thanks be to God, and amen.